Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today for this webinar on organic certification for producers. Just wait another 30 seconds or so, see if we get a few more. We've got a good list so far. All right, we might make a start. So thank you again for joining us on this edition of the Australian Organic webinar series. We're talking today about organic certification for producers. My name's Owen Gwilliam. I'm the Chief Technical Officer for Australian Organic Ltd, the industry body. I've worked for around 20 years in organic certification now, which is hard to believe. Mostly doing inspections, so from working for the certification bodies and conducting inspections, also working in certification office, and also a fair amount of consulting, so helping certified operators or new applicants for certification to prepare for organic certification. It seems like there's still a bit of a gap there in terms of help for operators who want to apply for organic certification. The certification bodies themselves are not really allowed to give advice. They're only allowed to help you understand the requirements of the standard. So sometimes it can be difficult for new entrants to understand the process. So that's why we're delivering these webinars, and hopefully they will be a big help. Now I will just switch to screen share now and get underway. Okay, so as I said, Australian Organic Limited is bringing you this webinar. I'm the Chief Technical Officer at Australian Organic Limited. This will be recorded for people who couldn't make it, or to watch again if it's that interesting for revision. I'd encourage you to check out our website and become a member if you're not already, and feel free to reach out to me at any time on that email address there, owen.gwilliam@ostorganic.com. That's a photo of me with the first organic sugarcane crop from a client a few years back, and it was the best crop of the season, so that was a good start. Today we're going to talk about the relevant standards for your certification, the different scopes or categories of certification for producers. We'll talk about the certification process. We'll talk about organic management plan, which is the key document for organic certification, and touch on inputs, record keeping, this thing called parallel production or part property, and then traceability and in-out balance, which is often a tricky one to get your head around, and then just touch on export markets. And then we will have time for questions at the end. If you want to add any questions into the chat box, please feel free to do so at any time. I'll probably just get to them at the end. I'll look through, and if we have time, run through some of those. So the relevant standards is really the place to start. If you are considering applying for organic certification, it's really important that you know what you're in for, that you know what the rules are, and if you're going to be able to comply. It does still happen fairly often that people apply for certification without fully understanding what they're in for. So I'd encourage you to get a copy of the national standard for organic and biodynamic produce, which is available on the Department of Agriculture and Water and Environment website. So that standard is legally enforced for export, technically not legally enforced within Australia. However, most markets, most wholesalers, supermarkets, etc., require certification to the national standard. They've effectively adopted it as a domestic standard, but it's still technically only voluntary within Australia. We hope and expect that will change in coming years, and that protection that's given to consumers overseas will also be provided to Australian consumers here. The other standard that may be relevant for you is our own Australian Certified Organic Standard, which has just been revised. It's just a private standard that is used for certified operators who are certified by ACO Certification Limited, and those who wish to use the BUD logo. which we own and license to the certification bodies to provide the certification to. So we as an industry body are not directly involved in certification anymore. However, we do own the private standard, the Australian Certified Organic Standard, and we own our logo, and we license that out to certification bodies to use. But in every case, the national standard is the baseline. You'll find that the Australian Certified Organic Standard might actually be, they're very similar, they're basically equivalent. But the Australian Certified Organic Standard has a little more information. It's a little bit more prescriptive. It might be helpful for you to understand the requirements. And for, I'm expecting most of you are producers, as in farmers. There is a bit of jargon around the certification scope. So hopefully this will help you understand it. But it's in a general sense, at the top level, it's producers and processors. Underneath processors, that includes handlers and wholesalers and so on. And underneath producers is the different types of farming operations, such as cropping, livestock, landless production, which is specifically only for mushrooms and sprouts, according to the national standard. So organic crops are grown in the ground. Terra firma, the national standard refers to it as. Also, certification under the producer scope can be provided to aquaculture producers and beekeeping producers, and the on-farm processing can be squeezed in underneath a producer certification as well, if you are processing only your own produce. If you're buying in produce from other farms, then you will need a separate processor certification. I hope that makes sense. Feel free to raise questions in the chat box if you want to go into depth further on that. Obviously, you can have multiple, I'll just jump back. Obviously, you can have multiple scopes on one farm. That's very common and encouraged, mixed farming. And generally, there's no additional fee. You can have as many of those scopes, depending on the certification body, and that may change over time. But generally, at the moment, producer certification can cover as many of those scopes as you want under one certificate. So we'll talk now a little bit about the certification process. Many of you will be familiar with this already. I have on the top there pre-certification. Technically, we've sort of done away with that terminology, but it is still commonly used and it is still helpful to think of it in that way. So you need 3 years of organic management to get to what used to be called A grade, and now it's just called organic. But after 1 year of organic management, you can be certified in conversion. So it's certified in conversion and certified organic. It used to be A grade, B grade. And in pre-certification, and as I say, that's kind of old terminology now, you're not allowed to make any reference to organic on the produce in that first year. But you can have a year of organic management behind you when you apply for certification and then potentially go sort of straight into in conversion. Although when I say straight in, it could still be a few months to get the inspection done and toing and froing with the correspondence with your certification office. So don't expect you can get it super fast, but one good approach for a farm that we have decided to apply for certification for a farm is to be sure that you're compliant and do that for, let's say, 9 months, and then apply for your certification, and you'll have your audit a month or so later. You'll get the paperwork through another month or so later, and you'll be ready for an in-conversion certificate in that second and third year. You'll be in an annual audit cycle after that, and if all goes well, be given an organic certificate after a total of 3 years of organic management. And organic management, really, when it comes down to it in terms of verifying that history, is usually sensibly interpreted as basically no prohibited inputs. So in reality, in your first year, you might not be 100% compliant because you're new to it, but you will need to be 100% compliant to no prohibited inputs. And that's the main part that they base that history on, if that history is going to contribute to your first 3 years. So 3 years to be organic, 1 year to be certified in conversion. And you have to have at least 1 year in conversion under the national standard. So even if you've got 3 years behind you, you'll still be in conversion for at least 1 year. And then you'll be into an annual inspection, annual audit cycle. In addition to the annual audits, you will be open to unannounced, unscheduled inspections at any time from your certification body, or indeed from the Department of Agriculture or other accreditation bodies that oversee your certification body. And that's the same for all of them. They will usually give some notice if they can, just for logistical reasons. But the national standard and relevant procedures require that there are additional, sometimes they call them random, or they can in fact be targeted as well, but they're unannounced, unscheduled, and some of them are additional from time to time. So I'd like to talk now about your organic management plan. Now, the organic management plan is the key document for your certification. It's referenced in the Australian Certified Organic Standard in 3.1.7, and it's a documented plan establishing your plans for ongoing adherence to the standard, and it can be incorporated into other manuals if you have them, or you can just use templates that are provided by your certification body. In the national standard, it's also required under 4.1.1, and the reference there is that you have to document how you'll develop and maintain the integrity of your operation in accordance with the standard. So they're pretty broad references in the standard. So to try to help you understand what is required in an organic management plan, I like to think of it in a couple of ways. One way is that if you were to take me on a tour of your farm and explain how you do everything and how you do it organically, and that would include pest and disease management, fertility management, how you know which inputs that you're going to use for the year, animal welfare, environmental aspects, maybe you're doing some biodiversity management, and then write all that down. And then that is your organic management plan. Another way I like to think about it, which can be helpful, is that it should be a document that you could actually hand someone and they could run the farm. And if your organic management plan is that good, then you'll experience other benefits, I think, in your operation, where you will see that the management improves because you have really thought about it and analysed it and documented what the procedures are. And something that's really good to keep in mind when preparing your organic management plan is the risks to organic integrity. So there'll also be a requirement in that plan to talk about what your neighbouring farmers are doing, and if that affects you at all, and if so, what buffer zones you're planning to implement, etc. So I believe all of the certification bodies, certainly most of them, provide templates for that, but you don't have to use the template, but it's certainly a good place to start. I would say the template at a minimum, and you can then write your own if you prefer the document to be in your own style. So yeah, describe the process in your own words and write it down. And as I said the next one already as well, imagine you're preparing a document that will allow someone else to run the business. Now, importantly, this document must be detailed enough so that, and this is what it is indeed used for, so that a certification officer sitting in the certification office can understand it and get a feel for the relevant risks on your operation, and if you are ready to manage them effectively. And the way that the certification works and the way that the audit works is that really the job of the auditor or inspector on the day is just to check whether your approved organic management plan matches reality. So the auditor or inspector shouldn't be turning up knowing nothing about your operation. They will have already read your approved organic management plan, and their job on the day is to verify that it matches reality. So I hope that helps you understand the job of the certification office, the importance of the organic management plan, sometimes called organic farm plan, organic livestock plan, organic system plan is the American terminology. They're all the same thing. It's your documented plan. And some of you may be familiar with quality assurance certification and so on. It's similar to like a QA manual. So you can write the procedures for how you're going to manage your farm. The certification office approves those written procedures, plans, and then the auditor on the day checks that it matches reality. Inputs will be very important in a production operation. So In the back of the national standard and in the back of our Australian certified organic standard, there are annexes or appendices, and they list the inputs, the generic materials that are allowable. So it doesn't list brand names, but it lists the generic materials like lime for a fertility input. So lime is a generic product. It's naturally mined rock. It is allowable for organic farms to apply that as a fertilizer. So running through the appendices and annexes of the relevant standard and making sure that you are only going to use those is important. If in doubt, ask your certification body, because some of the, well, many, and there's really been an explosion in the number and the variance of inputs for organic farmers in recent years, which is really helpful for farmers to help and to have those tools. But a lot of them are, they'll be multi-ingredient. So you do need to be quite careful with inputs, because if you accidentally put an input on that is prohibited, like maybe it just contains a small amount of, it might be called on the shelf for natural fertilizer, and it might be predominantly lime and rock phosphate, but it may also have a small amount of synthetic urea in it. And if you apply that to your paddock, you can be back to 3 years. You can be back to the start. Never trust what a sales agronomist tells you at the local produce store. If it's a certified allowed input, either by any of the Australian certification bodies, then yes, that will be fine to go ahead and use. So that makes it easy. Certified allowed input or certified input for organic farms. If it's not, then basically check with your certification body and be sure and have your list of inputs that you plan to use or you might need to use already prepared in advance, so that you're not in a situation where you or your farm worker is going to the local produce, the local rural supply store, and saying, hey, can I use this for organic? And they go, yeah, it's organic. And then it can really set you back. The inputs will be very important. Record keeping will be very important. And this is one area that farmers sometimes struggle with. So it's just the main activities, definitely inputs and outputs, but also significant activities such as cultivation or sowing and harvest. Livestock movements, certainly any livestock arrivals and departures, which is usually fairly well recorded through your national vendor declaration process. But basically, if it's not written down, it didn't happen in the eyes of a certification body. So it is very important to keep records of everything. And that can just be a farm diary. And again, similar to with the organic management plan, you will find a beneficial side effect of keeping all of these records will be that your farm management will improve. I've seen it time and time again where farmers think, I mean, we're all only human, so we think we can remember when and what we did, and it doesn't correlate well with written records sometimes. So if it's not written down, it didn't happen. At a bare minimum, all of the inputs and the outputs, sowing, harvest, livestock records, so marking new calves, for instance, should all be recorded. If you're in the honey production space, then all hive movements, all honey harvests from hives, and so on. Hope that makes sense. Now, some people who are interested in going down the path of organic certification for production will be put off by the idea that they might have to do it for their whole farm. And that is not the case. You can have part property certification, which might be especially relevant for vegetable producers who want to trial organic farming on a smaller percentage of their farm initially and see if they can stay on top of some of the more challenging issues like pest and disease with the limited suite of management options. And for something like pest and disease, obviously the focus will, and this is also a helpful part of developing the organic management plan, is thinking that through. Okay, I'm not going to have some of these Band-Aid type solutions. I'm only going to have these ones. What are the proactive management procedures I can put into place to minimize the risk? But yeah, so if you want to give organic a try on a small area, you can be certified just on part of your property. If you are, so partly just introducing this terminology, if you are producing the same type of product organically and non-organically, then that will mean you are engaged in parallel production, what they call parallel production. If it's a totally different crop type or livestock type, then you might not be considered to be in parallel production. But if you're doing some organic apples and some non-organic apples on your operation, then you're indeed a parallel producer. And there's sometimes, and quite appropriately, some additional scrutiny applied by the certification body, especially in the area of yields and sales. And also you will need to think about segregation in any storage or packing facilities on site. That was sort of a good segue, especially if you are doing parallel production. You will, well, even if you're not, you need to be able to do traceability and in-out balance. Traceability is a fairly easy one. An example for production will be an invoice of sale for a bin of pumpkins, and a way of tracing that invoice of sale and relevant shipping documentation, so that the truckers, the freight company's consignment note or whatever it might be, linking that back to the area of production on the farm. And you need to be able to trace that right back to every input and even the batch of seeds that you used. So the record keeping I mentioned earlier should be built in a way that allows you to trace everything that goes off the farm back to the area of production on the map, on your farm map, and back to the batches and the inputs, batches of seeds and the fertility inputs that were used. That's something that the auditor will spend quite a bit of time on during your audit. So it's very important to be prepared for that. Now, the in-out balance is related. It's sometimes called a mass balance, and it's sometimes actually pretty tricky on a farm. To use an example for more of a processing facility, a manufacturing facility, it's like the ingredients come in, they're mixed and they go out, and you add up what came in and what went out. And if there's a big discrepancy, then we might have a problem. If you're selling more organic produce than could have been manufactured with what you bought, then you'll be asked to explain that. And that's really important, especially in parallel production. So for the farm, the same assessment has to be made by the auditor of an in-out balance or a mass balance, and it'll normally be yield being linked back to a certain area of land and or amount of fertilizers used. So you'll have to show that over, and sometimes it's done over a period of time. The auditor might say, okay, for the last month or for the last crop, how much was produced from what area and what were the inputs? So having all of that information at hand will make that easy for the auditor on the day. And it, again, will likely improve your management of your farm, including the financial management, because you'll be able to work out more easily the actual return on investment for those crops. But the key thing that the auditor and the certification body are looking at there is that you've not produced more than you possibly could have from that area. And this is how we have caught people out over the years. That's why the auditor will focus on traceability and mass balance quite a bit. It's sometimes a surprise for people why the auditor wants to spend so much time on that type of paperwork. But it is a requirement from all of the certification bodies and all of the accreditation bodies and governments above them that this is looked at in great detail. I'll touch briefly on export markets. So I mentioned at the start that the national standard is the baseline requirement to be able to export produce from Australia with organic in the trade description. That's a legal requirement. If you export something with organic agricultural produce, that is, with organic in the trade description without it being certified to the national standard or without an organic goods certificate, which is a consignment per consignment document that is approved by the certification body, you're breaking federal law and there are penalties for it. So, and that's a good system that has allowed us to access a lot of export markets. But what I wanted to point out here was that it doesn't guarantee access to all export markets. And some examples where additional certifications are required are in the USA, Japan for some product types, Canada and Europe just for some product types as well. We actually have an agreement our federal government with the European Commission has an agreement for trade of organic, however it excludes wine and livestock. So there's a few little things to be aware of, and there are more. They're just some examples. So if you do intend to export either directly or via, if one of your customers, if you're aware that one of your customers wants to use your produce in an export destined product, then it will be worth investigating with them, asking the question, will you require any additional certifications? For instance, if you're growing some oats that are going to go into a muesli bar that are going to the United States, the manufacturer of the muesli bar will need certification for the United States, and you'll need it too for them to be able to buy those oats from you. So be aware of export markets and potential for additional certifications. Now, different certification bodies in Australia can offer some of these additional markets, so it's worth considering early on, and it may even impact your choice of certifier. So some of the certifiers have accreditations to deliver more export market access than others. So that's something worth considering if you think you might export either directly or indirectly. It usually, there will be an additional cost required, but it's usually the same audit process. It's a matter of some additional assessment at the certification office and maybe a few extra questions from the auditor on the day of the audit. The standards are in fact very, very similar. So it's kind of inconvenient that we don't have full recognition globally, but that's just how it is at this stage in the organic industry. We've been presenting and continue to present some webinars on export trade called the Trade Organic webinar series. So feel free to find that on our website as well and join us, and you'll get to see me again, but not only briefly, presented by some of our partners who are doing a great job of discussing the potential export markets that are available for organic products. Oh, there's the website there, tradeorganic.com.au. All right, that is all I have. So I will stop screen share now and see if there's already any questions here. Oh, I haven't got any yet. So I hope you haven't all fallen asleep. Please feel free to add any questions into the chat box or the Q&A box now, and I'll answer them if I can directly. Otherwise, I hope that this has been helpful, and please feel free to reach out to me at owen.gwilliam@ostorganic.com. Encourage you to become members if you aren't already, and very interested in your feedback about this. I hope it's been helpful. But I can't see any questions coming up. Thank you. Thank you. Yep, my pleasure. This is actually one of the most enjoyable parts of my job. I love helping operators who are considering going organic. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out. And with that, I might wrap it up. Thanks, everyone. See you at the next one.